Ignition sequence start. Engines on. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All engines running.
On today's World Insight with Tien Wei, a space milestone made 50 years ago, a man set foot on the moon and led to advances and innovation. What's next for lunar exploration? Here is our host, Tien Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing. Today, our special program on the 50th anniversary of the historic moon landing of the Apollo 11 on July the 20th, 1969. The lunar mission took astronauts more than 300,000 kilometers away from the Earth to its closest neighbor, the brightest celestial body in our night skies. Before we get down to our discussion, take a look at this and let's relive the moment when Neil Armstrong set foot on the lunar surface.
It was one of the biggest TV events in history. An estimated 650 million people around the world tuned in as American astronaut Neil Armstrong made lunar history.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The first man to step on the moon 109 hours, 42 minutes after the Apollo spacecraft left Florida, a journey powered by Saturn V. About 400,000 people worked on the lunar project. Engineers, coders, scientists, mechanics, doctors, tailors. But it all started with one man's vision.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The moon landing was a defining moment in the Cold War space race between the U.S. and the USSR, which started in 1957 when the Soviet Union sent the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, into space. The space technology that led to Apollo 11 was not only a technical feat, but also a bedrock of practical innovation. In 1972, NASA sent its last batch of moonwalkers with Apollo 17, and no manned mission have returned since. But the U.S. Space Agency recently said a program called Artemis, named after Apollo's twin sister in Greek mythology, is underway. They plan on putting astronauts on the moon by 2024 and use it as a training ground for Mars exploration.
For more on the 50th anniversary of the moonwalk, we have in Washington, D.C., Amitabh Ghosh, the chair of the Science Operation Working Group for the NASA Mars Exploration Rover mission. And in Rome, Italy, we have Giuseppe Riboldi, who is the president of the Moon Village Association. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Congratulations, first of all, to both of you, because it's an achievement that many have been working hard behind the scenes. So tell us about how that mission actually impacted your professional career. Mr. Ghosh, you go first briefly.
So, I was very young. I was actually not born. But I think what the lunar landings did is, if you talk to the older people, if you talk to my grandmother, nobody could even think that man could go to the moon at that time, when there were no sophisticated computers. The engineering was much less developed. How did they do it? And they changed the vision of mankind. Mankind never thought that they would be on another planet or on the moon. They would be restricted to Earth. The adventure was going to Europe, but here there was one man actually walking on the moon.
Yes.
So it changed the way that
what is it like for you
themselves.
personally? I mean, you are certainly in the field. How is that achievement 50 years ago having an impact on your choice of career? Very briefly, sir.
So, when I went to graduate school in the United States, I looked at moon rocks under a microscope. And I thought, the mysteries on Earth have been already studied. So I should really look at some other mysteries which are still to be discovered. And that's what that's what fascinated me, and that's how I ended up working on Moon and Mars and.
Well, you're currently working on Mars, but Mr. Riboldi, to you, you are working about the Moon all the time. So what about that event? What do you make of the impact of it?
First of all, ni hao.
Ni hao.
So nice to see you again. The impact for me was, of course, major. But I started to be involved in the Moon since I was 9 years old. So for me, the moon landing was a confirmation of what I had hoped since I was a little kid. So it was really a very exciting moment. Everybody which was not interested in space became interested in space. As for my personal experience, this gave me a further push, if I needed, to go towards scientific education, engineering. And so was the same for many other people.
Right.
So
we all have our moment in a way in terms of how the Apollo 11's landing on the moon, whether we experience it personally or not, because I was born much later than that. But that was quite a dramatic moment for every human being. But what does it mean, its legacy today, Mr. Riboldi? Shall we go to the moon now? What was actually the legacy of 50 years ago?
I think the legacy, it's about, very strangely, about Earth. Because basically when the Apollo went 50 years ago, as we all know, went for political reason. And it was not sustainable, and so it was stopped. However, the legacy, which many of the people still remember after 50 years, is the view of Earth from the moon. And this was the first time that really humanity took, let's say, note of the fact that we are a very small planet in the universe. You all know that this was the start of the ecological movement. So the biggest legacy, strange enough, was not so much on the actual moon itself, but how the moon relates to the Earth. So this was really the major legacy. Of course, there's been also technology, and there has been a lot of other, let's say, effect of going to the moon, economics. But on the cultural point of view, on the impression point of view, this is what the people remember most.
Certainly, we remember that dearly. Mr. Ghosh, to you, what was the legacy of 50 years ago? Scientifically speaking, what it has left with us, even though it was quite a leap forward in a way, and therefore cannot be repeated later in the year, but what was it meaning for all of us?
So I think there are 2 or 3 legacies I would say. One is we are not restricted anymore to Earth. So that in 1969 we realized that the human race does not have to be restricted to Earth. Second is, I think we realized mankind was really capable of pulling off very complex engineering tasks. So right now we have forgotten how technologically challenging this is, to go from Earth to moon, to through multiple stages, landing on the moon, taking off from the moon, coming back safely. Huge deal. And that was possible, and so it showed that we could, as humans, take on very complex engineering tasks. The third legacy is, at the backdrop of these space missions, enormous engineering human resources were created. Some of the discoveries, so this engineering human resources went on to do discoveries in other fields. And some of the discoveries which were created, done for the lunar program, went on to have real effects in life, which like the pacemaker.
Yes. So what exactly are some of these discoveries and inventions, and later how it has been adopted for our daily lives rather than just serving the astronauts? Mr. Ghosh, can you be just a little bit specific and brief at the same time, sir?
Right. So we call it in NASA, we call it the NASA offshoots, and we have a whole website. So there is a constant string of innovations which happen primarily to benefit of space mission, and then it goes on to benefit life on Earth. And so here I would say For
example, can you be specific? For example, what are those?
like the pacemaker, like the Velcro, like light-weighted materials used in space. Like the CCD camera, the digital camera, right? Before that, there was the film camera. A lot of people don't even know.
Exactly.
Photography used to be on film, right?
But
and
also, on the other hand, but also on the other hand, Mr. Riboldi,
yes,
we have seen politics play a very important role in the last mission to the moon by the human being. Now, how do you make up the role of politics in that mission, and how should it be now, Mr. Riboldi?
You mean the role of Apollo from the political point of view?
Yes.
Well, Apollo was basically a political mission. It was basically announced by Kennedy, as we all know, in the famous speech, and it was a challenge for the nation. We should not forget that when Kennedy made this famous speech of committing to the moon, the United States had just launched a suborbital flight a few days earlier. So the amount of work that needed to be made to put safely and get it back a man on the moon was something staggering that hardly anybody believed that was possible to be achieved. So the challenge that Kennedy put forward as a major political challenge for the system of Western versus the former Soviet Union was the most important event. And so Apollo, it is a political program. It has been implemented as a security program because of the policy priority. It had priority on all other equivalent programs, and so the whole nation was behind to really go forward and land on the moon before the end of the decade.
Now, when you think about it in reflection, Mr. Ghosh, is it the best way to do things? Now, we also see geopolitics these days in the world, but the question really is, should that play a pivotal role in advancing technologies, and how much will those technologies be used for real people? Mr. Ghosh.
Okay. The first part is, politics, I think, is inescapable. If there are three people, there is going to be politics. And two is, it has to be, it has to make sense to everyone, right? I mean, so everyone has to kind of, in the country, has to feel that this is something that is worthwhile doing with their taxpayer dollars. So at some level, you need the support of the public. And the answer to your second question is, I think space missions are hugely beneficial to motivate us, to train the next generation of scientists and engineers. I think there's a huge motivation factor here, this is something which makes humans put in their best foot forward and try to do the best that they can. So it's a very huge deal, and it's a very huge, think of the astronauts who went, it's a very huge stretch in your spirit,
Certainly.
We all look back and think it's so cool, but they might not have come back, right? So they are taking, you and I, when we got to our jobs, there is no life risk, but the astronauts had a life risk.
Yes, indeed. So that's part of their job also, the nature of their job as well. Mr. Ghosh and Mr. Riboldi, stay with us because we're going to continue our discussion about this. And you're watching World Insight. We'll take a short breather. More on the 50th anniversary of the moon landing and the space milestones achieved since then, right after this break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, program coming to you live from Beijing. 50 years ago, Neil Armstrong indeed took one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. Since then, many strides have been made in moon exploration. China aims to land astronauts on the lunar surface by next year after landing a probe on the moon's far side. India plans to use a massive rocket to send people into space by the year 2022. Russia's working group on a new spacecraft to send to the moon by by 2028. The Japanese Space Agency is on a mission to build a rover that will carry astronauts across the lunar surface. The private company SpaceX is building a Starship to take humans directly to the moon. Space is indeed the final frontier to boldly go where no one has gone before. Look at that, fascinating. For more on the anniversary of the moonwalk, 50 years already, we have in Washington, D.C. once again Mr. Ghosh from NASA. Meanwhile, we also have from Rome, Mr. Riboldi, who is from the Moon Village Association. In London, we are joined by Marek Zabart, professor of geodesy at the University College London, and in our Beijing studio, last but not least, Yang Yuguang, professor at the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation, also vice chair of the International Aeronautical Federation. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. A greeting to all of you once again on this anniversary. It's an achievement of a human being. But the question comes now, whether it should be the Mars or the moon. We've already seen different plans. So, Mr. Yang, briefly from you, what do you think?
Well, for all space-capable nations, either U.S. or China or Russia, sooner or later, they should go to Mars. I mean, a manned Mars mission and also a permanent base on the Martian surface. But if countries like China and Russia, they have not been to the moon before, they should go to the moon first.
Okay, but what about for you, Mr. Zabar? Do you agree with what Mr. Yang just illustrated?
I'm afraid not, actually.
Great.
Personally, I feel...
We have some discussion going on right now.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think the major benefits that we've had from the space race has been technology to observe and understand our planet and to develop technologies that benefit ordinary human beings on a daily basis: Earth observations, satellite navigations, satellite communications. I think we still have a lot of challenges making our own Earth a sustainable place to live, so my preference would be to put the money into using space technology to better understand the way in which the Earth is evolving and to solve our problems here.
And therefore, why it's Mars and not the moon?
Well, I don't really mind. Okay, call it Mars, call it the moon. It doesn't really matter. It costs a lot of money to develop those technologies and to fly those things. And even more so, the idea of trying to keep a human being alive all the way to Mars will be a hugely expensive thing to do. And I just feel that money will be better spent solving the problems we have on our own planet as it is now.
Wonderful. We're going to have that discussion a bit later. Well, Mr. Guisep, it seems that Mr. Zabart, it seems that Professor Zabart wants to take away all the fundings you have for missions going to the moon and use it elsewhere.
Well, I think the good news.
Well, I didn't quite say that.
Is
there we go.
Wow, I just tried to interpret it.
No, so what I was going to say, the good news is that in a multipolar system like we are, people are free. And so this time we go to the moon. We discussed earlier about the policy of Apollo. This time we go there for economics. So the issue is not so much only related to the government, but there are industry which are investing money, and you mentioned a few of them. There are many more. That believe that actually going to the moon and using the resources will create new market. So the discussion there at this point in time whether Mars or the moon is a bit of a fake discussion, because the reality is that the moon is the closest that we can get, and is the closest where we can experiment to demonstrate that they exist, the market. Once we have demonstrated that we can use the resources of the moon, then we can go also in other things. But we need first to demonstrate.
We can hear where you stand, Mr. Riboldi, as someone from the Moon Association. Mr. Ghosh, obviously, you have a different preference because you are on this Mars mission with NASA. Time and money well spent on the Mars for the Mars compared to the Moon?
I think Mars is a long-term, should be a long-term objective. Having said that, Moon is really a technology test bed that can be used to perfect your technology. So here, people perhaps forget that it takes just 3 days to go to the moon, and it takes 7 months or 6 months to go to Mars when it is closer to Earth. It can be on the other side of the sun as well. So, so if you imagine you send a human to Mars and something happens, so say a physical condition happens, then the human needs to wait 2 years to come back to Earth at the very minimum. So if something was to go wrong and you want to perfect technologies, I think moon is the way to go, and after you perfect your technologies, then you start on for a much longer mission. That's my perspective.
Well, I'm very confused right now, gentlemen. I mean, I've got 4 scientists in the field. 2 telling me, let's go to the moon first, then maybe Mars. Well, maybe we don't know. And the other telling me, let's just go to the moon. It's very important. And the other is saying, let's just not going anywhere. Let's remain on the Earth and make the money well spent. But one of the things is very important. What kinds of technologies are we testing right now? Whether it is going to the moon or going to the Mars, are we going to have a good picture of whether these technologies are going to benefit all of us in the immediate future? Probably that is the question we should really ask Mr. Yang.
Yes, I totally agree with Mr. Amitabh Ghosh. We should use the moon as a very important test bed, because you know that for go to the Mars, I mean a manned mission to Mars, we need the heavy launch vehicle. We need the technologies for the human beings to re-entry with a speed more than 11 kilometers per second. Okay. And also we need the technologies for human beings to stay in space for a long duration. All this technology is very important for both the Mars missions and the moon missions. And we can use that, as Mr. Giuseppe Ribadi has mentioned, the moon is very close to Earth, and it is more convenient to test these technologies. And moreover, I should emphasize that the moon is very meaningful for us. To study the moon, to study the history of the moon is very critical for the human beings to understand the destiny of human being in the future. So, and also, there are many resources, such as the water on the lunar surface. We can utilize that to exploitation of the solar system.
Professor Seybart, you can see Professor Yang is already very compassionate about this topic and seeing why are you preventing us from going to the moon, Professor Seybart?
Okay, well, I would say that we have been to the moon and we have been to Mars. And the missions, the robotic missions, the rovers, the ones that are based in orbit that take images and measure things like the gravity field, those are very important scientific missions, just as much as the flyby missions going into deep space, Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11, those kind of missions. So I don't think for a moment I'm trying to say that the science isn't worth doing. The question is, why send a human being all that way? Because once you put a human being in the loop, it costs a lot of money and it's very, very dangerous. So I think we have to ask the question, why are we doing these things?
Okay, why?
Science,
yeah, why?
I quite agree.
Mr. Ghosh is already ready and raised his hand to answer the question. Mr. Ghosh, go ahead.
So, I think there's a value to humans. If it was just about data, you would not actually go to a destination, you would just send your camera, right? You would not go to Disney World, you would just send a person or send a drone with your camera and it goes to Disney World. I think it's a very big thing to have the human experience. If you talk to Buzz Aldrin, as you have in this program, if you talk to somebody who has walked on the moon, yes, it is an experience to share with the 7 billion other people in this planet. And
okay, so it's like going to Disneyland. Is it really, Mr. Ribadi, like going to the Disneyland in the outer space? What's the point?
I don't think it's Disneyland of the outer space. I repeat, the moon, first of all, I just want to be a bit more precise. I am in favor of a step-by-step exploration, so moon and then when possible Mars, just to be clear. As far as Disneyland, I don't think it's a matter of Disneyland. The moon is a part of Earth, is the 8th continent of Earth, because the moon, it has been, according to all the science information, part of Earth and has been separated. So going to the moon, we are going to find ourselves. Let us not forget that a lot of things happening on Earth are related to the moon. From the sea levels to a number of natural phenomena, they are related to the moon. So the moon is an integral part. So going to the moon is simply an extension of exploring the Earth. So it's not a matter of Disneyland. Whether the moon will be used also for touristic opportunity, which is what was behind also your question, I will not exclude.
This is a very compassionate debate. I can already feel that there's fireworks in the air when you four gentlemen coming from different perspectives and look at this issue. But one thing is very important, that is, what about the different missions that different governments at least have been trying to sponsor, and also the private business as well? Which area should we focus on? After all, resources are limited, right? Money is limited, time is limited, talents are limited. So what should we focus on? Explore the darker side of the moon, or sending humans to the moon? What about sending humans to the moon? Which part of the mission becomes the most important? And also, compared to that, what about sending, human beings, not necessarily astronauts, to the moon? What would that be able to teach us? How can we best use our resources, even by going to the moon first? Mr. Ghosh, you go first. Briefly, please.
The best use is to, so imagine you're going from Beijing to Washington, D.C. You cannot carry your water and your fuel for the jet plane. The best use is to use it for what we call ISRU, in situ resource utilization. Learn how you can extract resources from the lunar soil so that at least humans don't have to carry water, at least you don't have to carry fuel for your return journey. Then if you want to have a permanent base like in Antarctica, you need probably some sort of a power system. So it is to make this sustaining. This is what the private sector is trying to do. They want to make the cost to the moon less. They want to use reusable launch vehicles. So it is to optimize cost and to make sure that you can do this more and more often, so that you can actually make a presence there.
What about the politics here? Mr. Yang, I have to be realistic here, because geopolitics is once again a major topic for many these days around the world. We see space competition to a certain extent, with a recent quote coming from NASA chair. So how, Mr. Ghosh, you don't have to comment about that, by the way. Mr. Yang, how do you see the competition, particularly in the sense of geopolitics in this regard? Is that helpful, or is that only getting us to the other direction?
Well, I think the current circumstance is quite different from that of the Apollo era during the moon race, because now we don't have the need for politicians to make the decision that we go to the moon as soon as possible, and also we will not have these kind of competitions or the race. I can understand the opinion of our guest from UK, because you know that the Apollo program took so much money. And also it's not sustainable. For the future missions, either from US or China or other countries, it must be sustainable. So going to the moon and also establish a transportation system more economically and more meaningfully is very important for all of us in the future. So, and also in another aspect is the international cooperation. For any human missions, including the missions to the moon or other celestial bodies, indeed, it needs a huge amount of money. It is quite difficult for the decision makers, and for all countries work together, and this can reduce the threshold for the decision makers and make it easier for them.
Is that international cooperation, Mr. Riboldi, still possible today when you have, once again, geopolitics become a key word now? When you look at the experiences and takeaways from the Cold War era and after in terms of space development, what does it tell us?
Well, it tells us that it's exactly the opposite, that space unites. You can see what has happened between the relationship between Russia and United States, that they are cooperating, as everybody knows, on the International Space Station. Even in the most difficult time, the cooperation on the International Space Station has never been put in question. So this might mean, and doesn't mean something. So it means that when you are engaged together in a project, politics is much or less important. So to come back to your question, the moon exploration with all these multifaceted program all over the places will give a unique opportunity for more peace and more cooperation. And as you know, our organization is trying to do exactly that, to try to get the people to cooperate with each other, because there is plenty of opportunity. You are asking what to do on the moon. But there are so many things that can you do on the moon that, you know, the limit, you know, there is no real competition. There is place for everybody. You just need to coordinate, to talk to each other.
Well, you just need to talk to each other, but sometimes, you know, Mr. Zabart, Professor, it is very difficult to talk to each other. That is the issue here, isn't it?
Well, returning to your earlier point about the geopolitical situation and commercial developments and competition, well, competition is a very good thing.
Of course.
Competition drives innovation, and what we're seeing now in space is unprecedented level of innovation. We have reusable launch vehicles. We have launch vehicles capable of deploying 50 to 100 satellites at any one go. We have new forms of internet communication becoming available. But to illustrate your point about how the geopolitical situation, although there are tensions, it can give rise to positive outcomes, is satellite navigation. So USA and the Russians first developed satellite navigation. Satellite navigation benefits everyone on the planet. Everybody who carries a smartphone can now navigate around in a very, very effective and efficient manner. Now, the competition meant that people wanted to build more and better satellite navigation systems. So China, for example, has launched its very excellent Beidou system, which has been a very big success for China, and Europe has launched Galileo. So now we have 4 times the number of satellites available, and everyone can use them. So the competition drives innovation, and that innovation creates systems of benefit to everybody on the planet.
Are you concerned, Mr. Yang, that some kinds of geopolitical competition might be preventing us from doing the real technological competition and innovative competition, which are certainly the good ones, from now on?
Well, that depends. You know, that's what we have discussed about the navigation system. For earning the market, of course, there are competitions, but mainly it is a commercial one.
Yes.
Because you know that we are only have limited quantities of customers. They use this system, or they use other system, or use both. So this is some kind of competition. Also, from the viewpoint aspect of technologies, there are also competition. But this, as our guests have mentioned, it drives the innovation. It is also a good thing. And for the exploration, I mean, the manned missions or the deep space missions, for these kind of things, usually we have more cooperation than competition in the current era. So I think all these are very good things for the future.
What about the involvement of the private sector, gentlemen? To what extent it is developing the technologies, and how much will it bring both competition and vitality to this specific field? Mr. Ghosh.
So I think this has been the greatest development the last 10 years. So the private sector has really brought in a new vision. Okay, if you think about what new vision, one is costs. You know, if a government organizes a space mission, they don't think of cost. The private sector thinks of reusability. They think of how do you get the cost per seat down. So Elon Musk's vision of getting a spaceship to Mars is to use 400 people in one spacecraft so that you can get the price down. The second, so that is very, very important. And the other important thing is, how do you sustain space exploration? You need a mass market. The private sector looks for that mass market. If you think of the early stages of aeroplanes and even ships, there was no mass market. Nobody wanted to fly. It was kind of funded by the government, actually by the Postal Service,
right?
That ensured that the aeroplane industry survived. If you think of the similar way, the space industry needs the government to survive initially, but it might actually find that mass market where you or I or somebody who's interested will spend $200,000 once in their lifetime to go to the moon or go to Mars.
It sounds very tempting. In fact, Professor Zabart, what kind of private competition mean for many of the programs now still sponsored wholly, almost, by the governments?
Yeah, I mean, Elon Musk's vision is quite interesting because obviously he wants to develop the ability to go to Mars. But how is he doing that? He's doing that by launching an unprecedented number of communication satellites into low Earth orbit. That means roughly between 600 and 1,000 kilometers off the surface of the Earth. Now, in the next few years, that area of space will become populated by at least another 8,000 satellites, which is absolutely unprecedented. So we're getting some great innovation, reusable launch vehicles, the ability to launch multiple satellites, global internet coverage coming to parts of the world where nobody can yet access the internet. So those are all good things. And Elon Musk's vision is to raise money via those technologies to sponsor his work going to Mars. So for me, it's the law of unintended consequences. We just get better technology, cheaper technology, more accessible technology, which can be used for science, which can be used for the benefit of ordinary people.
But Mr. Ribaudy, if it is only Elon Musk, there's the issue of a monopoly actually here. And more, we have seen the news recently. There certainly have been quite a number of failed attempts in terms of developing the latest technology, at least on the private sector. So what do you think, Mr. Ribaudy? Is it really likely to be a boost that we can see in the near future?
I think everybody talks about Elon Musk because obviously he is the one that has been giving an impressive, let's say, result. But as you mentioned, there are plenty of other commercial companies around the world. For instance, Blue Origin, also in the United States. So it's clear that a lot of those companies are in the United States because the United States have started earlier than other countries to get and facilitate the commercial space industry. But there are a number of other commercial companies, including China, which is coming up. China, as you all know, is setting up a launch company, which is about starting. So I am optimistic that we will not have a monopoly. I think Elon Musk is a good example, and I think as anything good examples are always good. There are a number of other countries like Europe, China, possibly South America eventually, maybe even Russia, that will move in the direction of private industry. And I think the government, and also including the Chinese government, sees an advantage of having private industry involved because they will lower the cost. We can see in the United States that a NASA mission costs much more than a private mission. And the reason, industrial mission, and the reason is because they can take a bigger risk. That's all.
Okay, Mr. Ghosh, one final word from you before we move on.
I think the biggest thing is whether it's not a monopoly or not. I think the biggest question here is there a mass market in space?
Okay.
If there is a mass market in space for maybe space resources, maybe space tourism, then there will be millions of private sector companies who will be there, and this will be a huge booming sector like the aerospace industry, right? But if there is no mass market, if, for example, Microsoft started a tablet like an iPad in 2000, nobody bought it, it died. But look, in 2007, Apple started a tablet and everybody bought it, and that completely changed the landscape.
Time is a matter.
So here also,
yes, time is an issue.
The mass market
before we go, I have to ask you this. Let's move on to a very important topic, also a concern closer to home, human existence, as we mentioned earlier, and its challenges. As we explore outer space and seek other worlds, toxic human activities are also altering our own planet. Climate change, landfill buildup, biodiversity loss, and all sorts of pollution are the biggest challenges we face today, and they are imminent. So could space technology offer practical solutions to save our environment, or are we only spending all these resources, very important, elsewhere for the outer space study, not necessarily taking care of ourselves? I have to go to you about that final question. Professor Zabar, you certainly have your time right now.
Well, okay, so first of all, we can thank the space race in the 1960s for giving us access to space. And we as a species have put missions into orbit around Earth which help us understand in a very clear and scientific way about how the impact of our own behavior affects the climate. I'm thinking of measuring sea level change from space and measuring the polar ice caps, measuring the hydrological cycle. Now, we just simply couldn't do that without these spaceborne platforms. And so, in Christianity, they say the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. So we gain a lot through this technology, but we also put space debris into orbit. We have weaponization of space. We have an arms race going on in space. So it's just like anything that humans get involved with. Some of it we do well, and some of it we just don't learn from history, and we're pretty dumb.
Professor Riboldi, you probably want to respond to that.
Well, I just want to say that everything that we do in life, every technology has advantages and disadvantages. It does not exist one with only advantage. I will just move one step further about the impact of space activity on the environment. It was described very rightfully that the Earth observation has been possible because of the platform, but I will say that going to the moon in the long range could be a major saving the planet operation, because many of the very polluting industry can be moved to the moon, because the environment of the moon is completely different from the environment on the Earth, and the environment of the moon can tolerate what the environment on Earth cannot tolerate. So even from that respect, the moon is most likely a very good solution for alleviating, if not solving completely, problem on Earth.
We are really running out of time. Even though we devoted 45 minutes to this special program, there's still a lot of topics we would love to cover for the future. Thank you so much, the four gentlemen, Mr. Ghosh, Mr. Riboldi, Professor Zabart, and Mr. Yang. Really appreciate it. Our guests coming from different parts of the world, talking about their dream of going to the moon on the 50th anniversary of the historic moon landing of Apollo 11. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us. World Insight CGTN into your search engine. Check out our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. The weekend is up. Have a great one, everyone. Bye for now.